it every day as people got more comfortable. They were forced to shop through Amazon. They were, you know, and so now they've become accustomed to it. It didn't really revert back as much as maybe people expected to the in-person shopping or what have you. And credit unions are preparing for that too, with the right sizing of branches and things like that. That used to be and still are important, but certainly had a different focus. And so one of the things you talked about is being consumer friendly. And consumer friendliness has always been a hallmark of credit unions. But so the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau recently put out an advisory to credit unions talking about chatbots and how they could potentially violate consumer protection laws. And so how can credit unions avoid running into problems with CFPB or consumers in general?
Yeah, what a powerful question. Like there's just so much to kind of think through and unpack in that area. But I think you're absolutely right. And I think especially with the news on the scene with ChatGPT coming online, it's all the rage. Probably, in a fashion that I haven't seen very often, is kind of the emphasis and the energy around AI and what we call generative AI, which is like basically it creates something out of nothing for the users of it, which is incredibly powerful. But as Spider-Man says, right, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So there's a lot of things to unpack, and I think the mystery or the challenge behind the ChatGPT space or generative AI is we don't know where it's learning its information. It's a little bit of a black box, and I think that's where, if I were to think about the heart of the CFPB guidance comes from, is because we don't know where it's being trained and where it's learning a lot of the information and how it constructs that, right? It's the whole point of artificial intelligence. It's not rote memorization that we teach it. It learns on its own. There's inherent risk in that, right? What goes in, don't know, and then how it learns and how it trains, we don't know. So I think the challenge credit unions are going to have to face moving forward is how do they ensure that the data that they get from the generative AI technologies is safe, appropriate, and compliant for their members and what they want to do for both their members and their prospects. And I think there's a couple different philosophies that you can kind of think through. One is maybe like a more of a generic framework, where it's like a ChatGPT. It's like, hey, we're going to ingest everything in the world, and we're going to try to come up with something that's appropriate. And I've been kind of impressed and amazed by what ChatGPT can come up with, even on like just playing around with my own. Then there's another class where I think they're trained on very specific financial data, like financial space. So very specific for a niche. It could be financial, it could be even credit union specific, right? And I think those will be even safer guardrails, where it's like, hey, these are very appropriate for our industry. And then there's a third model, which I think is probably the safest for credit unions, which is hey, like the language will always train, but it requires a human to approve kind of the standard answers that it provides. And so in those particular cases, going off the rails is highly unlikely, right? So if you think about, when we were looking at the space, I'm sure you're aware that Glia acquired an asset in this space, FinAI. But when we looked at FinAI, they were doing kind of the third model, which was, hey, look, we're just going to look at all the intents people are trying to do. They're trying to check their balance. They're trying to understand the routing number, the most common intents. And then we're going to suggest something and someone has to approve that so that we know exactly what the answer is going to be. And then the AI part of it is it listens to all the conversations that happens and say, hey, look, we're getting a lot more conversations about, the Silicon Valley Bank and how does that impact the credit unions, and it creates a new intent, but it still, again, has to be approved. I think as if I were a credit union thinking about how do I, be compliant, but also leverage these new technologies, I would think about those 2 to 3 areas. It'd be like, hey, what space do we want to play in? How do we want to think about the risk in our world? And then, being compliant. That's generally how I think about it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure the credit union market will appreciate it as well. The CFPB likes to rein everything in. And this is one more way, that credit unions can be efficient as long as they're doing it correctly. And being continuing that trust from their members and potential members. So what are some of the things, kind of going back to, I'm going to refer to COVID again, which it changed the world. So
Yeah.
can't not, but it, all along, credit unions have been talking about digital transformation, and they're in the digital customer journey and that kind of stuff. But they were just talking. It was like very slow progression from my perspective, toward that. Okay, they're forced to do it, right? Because
Yeah.
so what do you wish the credit unions you work with understood, or what should they be asking about, if they're looking for a partner for chat? What are the questions they should be looking for? What is the due diligence they should be asking about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It's funny that you mentioned, like I think if I'm hearing you correctly, the credit unions have been a little bit slower to adopt. Historically, what we're finding, and many of the customers that we talk with, I've actually been surprised at how visionary or how comfortable they are with just leapfrogging. Where, look, we're not going to stair step this into all the 7-8 process of digital transformation. It's like, look, I'm here today. Why should I go through steps 2 through 7? I want to go all the way to what I think is a more modern way to interact with our customer base and our member base. And I thought that was super impactful. And I was like, wow, I haven't seen that very often. So while maybe historically they have been slower to adopt, I've been pretty impressed with the folks I've spoken with.
Glad to hear that shift.
And their appetite, just to kind of absorb different technologies. And so, one of the things that I think about is, this isn't, unique to credit unions in any way, but I still see a lot of the siloed nature about how they think about interacting and engaging with their base, which is, okay, what do I do for chat? What do I do for phone? What do I do for, video or co-browsing? And they even have their teams organized in that way, where it's like they have a chat team, or they have like this different teams. And I think some of the questions that I would encourage to think about is that was probably why they had to organize, because the technology didn't exist. Today, the technology exists to allow them to think about really different ways of interacting with their base, where it doesn't have to be, okay, I'm only going to take these types of needs on one type of channel, and then these type of needs on via phone, and only see 7 people can answer on phone, and these people can answer on chat. Like, you don't do that in a branch, right? In a branch, you can kind of serve the whole person holistically. How do we extend that experience, that branch experience, beyond the physical walls? And I think that's what I get excited about, is that technology now exists to think about interactions differently. So, one of the ways that we think about it is, we think about, hey, there's maybe a class of needs that people have, right? Do they have complex needs? Do they have simple needs? And we think about it in a 2x2. Do they have, are they trying to do something, or are they trying to decide on something? So some things can be simple and doing, like, I'm just trying to get the routing number. Something can be complex, and you're deciding on it, like applying for a mortgage loan. What I think the opportunity exists here is credit unions can think about an overall interaction strategy. Think about it not just as like hey, I want to do chat, or I want to do self-serve, but hey, what kind of experience do we want to deliver depending on the need that a member has, and just thinking about it holistically, because before technology didn't allow them to do that. Now the technology does exist for a lot of them to think through an overall end-to-end interaction strategy.